Somewhere deep in the tobacco-soaked soil of 18th century Virginia, a secret pulsed quietly beneath the surface, one that would rewrite everything you think you know about power, blood, and control. Courthouse records, charred by fire and nearly erased by flood, survived just enough to whisper a truth too dangerous for polite conversation. A man, legally classified as property, fathered 37 children, white, documented, heirs of prominent planter families, and yet he was never punished. Imagine the architecture of secrecy required to maintain such a paradox, the careful orchestration of social codes, the silent complicity of entire communities, and the invisible chains that bound everyone in place, regardless of their status. This was not an accident. This was control engineered over decades, a psychological system more intricate than any prison. The planter families maintained appearances, the enslaved recorded realities in whispers, and one man, known only in documents as Joseph, stood at the center, simultaneously powerless and indispensable. To speak this truth aloud would unravel the social order, yet the truth persisted, hidden in plain sight, like a shadow crawling across history. Tonight, you will descend into that shadow. You will see the mechanisms of human complicity, the fragility of power, and the cost of silence. And when you emerge, nothing will feel the same again. In 1774, the Rappahannock River winds cut through Virginia like veins in the land, carrying wealth, power, and secrets. Along its banks, grand Georgian plantations rose like monuments to authority, each column a silent declaration. We own this world. Marcus Warfield, newly inheriting a 1,200-acre estate, walked these halls with the pride of a man who understood the machinery of dominance. His wife, Catherine, delicate in appearance yet sharp as a blade, managed the household with precision, her composure hiding a mind that already measured the vulnerabilities of every soul around her. It was here, amid the vast tobacco fields and the rigid social hierarchy, that Joseph arrived, a young, strikingly well-proportioned man, purchased not for the fields, but for proximity to the household, for his presence where the unseen currents of desire and obligation intersected. No one spoke of it, yet everyone noticed the way certain tasks were assigned, the inexplicable attentiveness of the mistress, the pattern forming quietly over months. In the shadows of the quarters, whispers began, delicate and dangerous, acknowledging that something unprecedented was taking shape. Here the rules of ownership, race, and inheritance bent under invisible pressure. And in this subtle distortion, the first threads of a conspiracy that would span decades were woven, binding master, mistress, and servant into a fragile, terrifying choreography. The spring of 1775 brought the first child, and with it, a ripple of tension no ledger could capture. Catherine's pregnancy, perfectly timed and meticulously concealed, ended with the birth of a healthy boy, Marcus Jr., documented as the legitimate heir of the Warfield estate. On paper, the story was flawless, yet in the quarters, in hushed tones, the enslaved observed patterns no law or custom could sanction. The child's dark eyes, the strength in his limbs, the resemblance whispered in silence. Something beyond legitimacy had taken root. Marcus Warfield, proud and public in his paternal role, seemed oblivious, yet his consent was woven into the arrangement, a calculated performance that ensured his position and the cooperation of the surrounding families. And Joseph, ever present, ever silent, moved through the household like a ghost, vital yet invisible, a linchpin in a system no one dared acknowledge. Each subsequent birth, spaced with deliberate precision, escalated the stakes. Catherine's second, third, fourth children arrived under the same veil of legality, each adding weight to the invisible web, each demanding secrecy. Outside the Warfield estate, neighboring planters noticed the vitality, the uncanny vigor of these children, yet the truth was coded in silence, in gestures, in avoidance. To speak aloud would mean ruin, not just for the mistress or the servant, but for the fragile architecture of wealth, power, and inheritance that held Virginia's elite together. By 1783, the pattern could no longer be confined to the Warfield estate. Neighboring families, the Bradfords, the Suttons, felt the invisible touch of Joseph's presence. Rebecca Bradford, barren for over a decade, requested his assistance during her pregnancy, and 9 months later, a robust child was born. Observers noted subtle similarities to the Warfield offspring, the shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw, the peculiar tone of the skin. The whispers grew, but only in the margins. carried by those whose survival depended on reading the currents beneath polite society. Sarah Sutton followed the same path, twins arriving after years of childless marriage, the evidence of Joseph's role expanding across the county, yet impossible to acknowledge legally. Virginia law protected appearances. Children inherited the status of their mother. A white married woman's child remained white, legitimate, untouchable. And so the conspiracy spread, its architecture reliant on fear, social necessity, and silent complicity. Marcus Warfield's acquiescence was not passive. He managed schedules, oversaw movements, and sanctioned transfers, ensuring the machine continued with mechanical precision. Joseph remained central, a paradox of power and invisibility, whose silence held the entire network together. Each birth deepened the stakes, yet outwardly, the county observed nothing amiss. Behind closed doors, the truth hovered like a shadow, growing heavier with every passing year, binding masters, mistresses, and servant into a web that would endure for decades, untouchable by law, morality, or conscience. By 1790, the scope of Joseph's influence was undeniable. 7 families, dozens of children, a silent arrangement spanning decades. Yet the public ledger told a story of prosperity and legitimacy. Marcus Warfield, now seasoned in the orchestration of appearances, coordinated movements with precision. Requests arrived from neighboring estates. Joseph would be alone, under the guise of heavy labor, and within a year, a child would be born. Every transfer was documented, every absence explained, every potential scandal contained. Yet beneath the surface, the weight of the conspiracy grew unbearable. The enslaved community, aware of patterns and secrecy, kept oral records, marking time and life with meticulous care. Each birth, each resemblance, each unspoken truth was a testament to the invisible architecture of power. Those who controlled the flow of information controlled reality itself. Even the county clerks, midwives, and physicians who witnessed anomalies remained silent, bound by fear, loyalty, or self-interest. And Joseph, both crucial and invisible, endured, a living linchpin whose existence upheld the illusion of legitimacy while quietly reshaping bloodlines. No law could capture him, no moral code could dictate his fate, yet his every action carried consequences far beyond comprehension. This was not merely a secret, it was an engineered system of control, a psychological architecture that manipulated inheritance, identity, and perception, an invisible empire within the seemingly ordered society of Virginia. By 1791, the conspiracy teetered on the edge of exposure. A visiting merchant from Pennsylvania, unaware of the invisible rules governing Virginia's planter elite, observed Joseph accompanying Catherine Warfield on a routine trip. His casual remark, "Your servant seems unusually familiar with your household," was innocent enough, yet it landed like a stone in a still pond. Marcus Warfield's response was deliberate, controlled, precise. Joseph was loyal, indispensable, above suspicion. The message was clear to those who knew, question nothing. Beyond the polite veneer, tension simmered. Every gesture, every assignment, every trip was a performance calibrated to preserve secrecy. The children's health, their vigor, their uncanny similarities, all were invisible proofs of the unspoken arrangement. Within the enslaved quarters, understanding grew. Joseph was more than a man, he was a fulcrum, the axis upon which decades of deception turned. Any misstep, any indiscretion could unravel a web that spanned families, estates, and generations. Outside the house, whispers circulated among observers who sensed patterns they dared not articulate. The architecture of power had revealed a flaw. Even perfect planning could not fully contain curiosity. And yet, Marcus and Catherine continued, undeterred, their coordination immaculate, their silence deliberate, their control absolute. This was no longer merely a household secret. It was a carefully maintained psychological system, one that manipulated perception, inheritance, and social order itself. By the mid-1790s, the scale of Joseph's influence reached near impossibility. Catherine Warfield had borne 11 children, all legally attributed to Marcus, yet the pattern had spread. Rebecca Bradford had 4, Sarah Sutton 6, and 3 other families added 2 or 3 each. 37 children, all documented as white, all thriving, all heirs to fortunes they were never biologically entitled to. The county registry remained immaculate, masking a complex choreography of secrecy and complicity. Joseph moved with careful precision. his presence requested at specific times, his loyalty ensured through a network of incentives and intimidation. Overseers, midwives, and household staff, all aware, all silent, participated in a tacit agreement. Reveal nothing, survive everything. The children themselves were paradoxes, legitimate in law, illegitimate in biology, inheritors of wealth that was both theirs and not theirs. Yet no rebellion, no exposure, no legal challenge emerged. Every participant understood the stakes. One misstep would unravel decades of social order, ruin reputations, and shatter lives. Marcus orchestrated the logistics with methodical patience. Catherine managed appearances with ruthless intelligence, and Joseph embodied the nexus of power and invisibility. It was a system built not merely on secrecy, but on psychological control, managing perceptions, sustaining illusions, and bending law, custom, and morality to serve an unspoken hierarchy. The county watched, oblivious to the invisible empire growing within its midst. By 1798, the fragile silence surrounding Joseph began to strain under the weight of observation. The eldest Warfield's son, Marcus Jr., now 23, prepared for a socially advantageous marriage, and the families watched for cracks. Observers began noticing uncanny similarities across children from different households. Eyes, jawlines, gestures, subtle markers that defied coincidence. A traveling portraitist quietly remarked on repeating facial structures. A physician's private journal recorded a peculiar consistencies in the county's youth, yet nothing was publicly voiced. The conspiracy had evolved into an open secret, known yet unspoken, a psychological web binding the powerful and the powerless alike. Marcus and Catherine maintained control, but every additional birth, every resemblance, every quiet observation chipped at the edges of their empire. Even Joseph, the linchpin of this vast social experiment, carried the psychological weight of decades, his silence both obedience and survival. The county itself, structured on hierarchy and legal codification, had unknowingly become an instrument in a deeper system of manipulation. Inheritance, legitimacy, and racial order all bending to the invisible architecture they could not perceive. The consequences of exposure were not hypothetical, they were existential. One whispered question, one skeptical glance, one misinterpreted remark could ignite a chain reaction. And the truth, as it often does, was waiting. Patient, inevitable, and merciless, for the precise moment when the structure could no longer contain it. By 1800, the conspiracy faced its first existential threat. Gabriel's rebellion had heightened Virginia's fear of free black people, and new laws demanded manumitted individuals leave the state within a year. Joseph, technically free but still bound to the Warfield estate, became a legal anomaly, a danger to every family invested in the secret. The county sheriff, Howell, unfamiliar with the arrangements of decades past, began asking questions. Marcus Warfield, now older and cautious, petitioned the court for Joseph's continued presence, supported not only by his own authority, but by letters of endorsement from Thomas Bradford, Edmund Sutton, and 4 other heads of prominent families. Their unity revealed the underlying truth. This was no private household matter. It was a meticulously maintained network of control, engineered to manipulate law, inheritance, and social perception. Every participant, from the eldest child to the midwives, understood that a single misstep could expose the biological reality beneath decades of legality. And yet, the families acted with precision, reinforcing Joseph's position, shielding him publicly while ensuring he remained indispensable privately. Freedom, in his case, was illusionary. Autonomy was subordinate to the architecture of secrecy. Every document, every petition, every signature became another layer of psychological control, reinforcing obedience, loyalty, and silence, turning a man into a pillar of a social system that could destroy him if he spoke. In January of 1800, Joseph's freedom was formalized, yet nothing about his daily existence changed. The manumission papers granted him legal independence, but the contract that followed ensured his continued presence, bound by obligations designed to preserve decades of carefully orchestrated deception. He became a free man in law, but in practice remained the axis of a psychological system that controlled entire families. Catherine Warfield, Marcus, and the Allied planters had constructed a network where loyalty and fear converged. Joseph was untouchable by ordinary scrutiny, yet inextricably tied to obligations he could never refuse. The births continued, 5 more children between 1800 and 1804, bringing the total to 42, 37 surviving into adulthood. Each child, a paradox, white by law, secretly connected to Joseph by blood, raised unaware of the invisible threads that defined their lineage. Observers, strangers to the conspiracy, began whispering about the uncanny vigor and resemblance among these children, yet no one dared connect the dots openly. The psychological architecture remained intact, self-reinforcing and perilously delicate. Every gesture, every instruction, every movement of Joseph was calibrated to maintain equilibrium, to prevent curiosity from morphing into exposure. He was both cornerstone and ghost, essential yet invisible, a living instrument of power, loyalty, and silent obedience, whose very existence tested the boundaries of law, morality, and the human mind's capacity for secrecy. By 1803, the consequences of decades-long deception began manifesting in subtle, unnerving ways. Joseph's children, now adolescents, exhibited traits that could not be ignored. Resemblances surfaced across families, the tilt of an eye, the curve of a hand, an uncanny vigor or intelligence. At first, these observations were dismissed as coincidence or youthful resemblance, but repetition created unease. Elizabeth Warfield, Catherine's 4th daughter, at 17, overheard conversations among the household staff and glimpsed the truth. Her confrontation with Catherine was intense, sharp, yet ultimately suppressed. She was sent to Charleston for 2 years, away from the epicenter of the secret, a temporary exile to contain potential exposure. Across the county, the planters began noticing patterns too delicate to articulate. Faces, health, intellect. They all suggested an invisible force shaping generations, a hidden architect manipulating inheritance and legitimacy. Joseph, still bound by obligation and silence, carried the psychological weight of being both linchpin and non-entity. He could not speak, yet he bore the consequences of everyone's actions. The conspiracy, once invisible, was now a palpable tension vibrating through families, an unacknowledged truth pressing against every social gathering, every letter, every dinner. The system designed to protect the secret now demanded vigilance at every turn. For one misstep could ignite a cascade of revelation that decades of planning could never contain. By 1806, the carefully maintained balance of secrecy began to fracture under social and psychological pressures. The children, now adults, were establishing their own households, inheriting land, wealth, and status, all while carrying a hidden truth in their blood. Joseph remained central, a living nexus of obligation, loyalty, and unspoken knowledge. Every planter family relied on his silence, every midwife, physician, and servant complicit in a conspiracy that had outlasted generations. Yet whispers circulated in private parlors and among traveling merchants. Observant strangers noted the repeated physical traits among ostensibly unrelated families. Small inconsistencies, a shared glance, a familiarity too deep to be explained, fueled suspicion. The psychological burden on Joseph was immense. He existed simultaneously as a free man and a tool, essential yet invisible, his obedience maintained through complex social engineering. Catherine, aging and exhausted, began to recognize the fragile architecture she had upheld. The secret could not last forever. Every letter, every petition, every bequest was a thread in a web that, if severed, could unravel the reputations, fortunes, and legitimacy of dozens. The tension was no longer hypothetical. It was pressing, intimate, and omnipresent. Every choice, every gesture, every meeting became a rehearsal in maintaining the impossible. The system of control was at its apex, and the slightest misstep could trigger catastrophe. In 1810, the web of secrecy faced its first true threat. One of the Bradford sons, recently returned from Philadelphia, announced at a family dinner that he had embraced abolitionism. His words, casual yet revolutionary, sent a shockwave through the room. To an outsider, it might have seemed a personal conviction, but to the conspirators, it was a spark threatening to ignite decades of hidden truths. His father, Thomas Bradford, acted immediately, withdrawing him from Virginia and isolating him from the estate. What the son had yet to understand was the full magnitude of his own heritage. His biological father was Joseph, To challenge the institution of slavery was to threaten not only ideology, but the very foundation of his own legitimacy. Across the county, other children of Joseph, well-educated, wealthy, socially integrated, began encountering the same subtle dangers. Observers noticed striking resemblances, whispered remarks circulated, and the tension thickened like a storm cloud. Catherine Warfield, now in her 70s, understood the fragility of the arrangement as keenly as ever. Every interaction, every social engagement, now carried the risk of exposure. The psychological control systems, perfected over decades, were being tested. Joseph remained the silent center of this storm, a man whose existence was both shield and target, whose obedience maintained the equilibrium, yet whose presence alone carried the weight of unspeakable truths. March of 1812 marked the turning point. Marcus Warfield, the architect of decades-long deception, died at 74. His passing shattered the delicate balance that had protected the secret for generations. The funeral, held beneath a fog-laden Rappahannock morning, was a tableau of power and fear. Every prominent family attended, their faces masks of propriety, their minds sharp with unspoken calculations. Joseph stood among the enslaved, now freed yet still bound by contracts and obligations, an ambiguous figure central to every family's hidden truth. Catherine, frail but resolute, wept with deliberate control. Her grief was both genuine and performative, a final act in a drama she had sustained for 40 years. The reading of Marcus's will revealed an unexpected twist, a bequest of $5,000 to Joseph, more than many overseers earned in a lifetime. Silence fell over the room, thick and suffocating. The sum was a recognition, a trap, an undeniable acknowledgement of his role in the intricate web of power, reproduction, and control. Children, now adults, understood with dawning horror what this meant. Not just for Joseph, but for themselves, for their legitimacy, and for the social order their families had meticulously preserved. The conspiracy, once invisible, now hung exposed, fragile and alive, its equilibrium destabilized by mortality, inheritance, and the weight of secrets too long contained. Catherine, now 74, faced the unbearable clarity of reality. Marcus was gone, the orchestrator of silence and social equilibrium, and the conspiracy he had carefully maintained could no longer endure without his guidance. She began sorting her private papers, letters meticulously hidden for decades, each one a confession, a record of her orchestration, a map of obligations and secrets spanning generations. One letter, written in 1795 to her sister in Charleston, revealed the truth with chilling precision. Joseph had fathered children across 7 families, Marcus knew and permitted it, and the arrangement was sustained through mutual dependency, fear, and silence. Catherine showed this letter to her eldest daughter, Amelia, testing her understanding, her loyalty, her capacity to inherit the burden. "Mother," Amelia said, "if this survives, our entire world collapses. Our brothers, our sisters, our children, their lives are all bound to this lie." Catherine's response was resolute. "The lie survives only if someone bears witness. If I die and destroy it, the secret dies with me, but the truth must endure." The weight of decades pressed upon them both, a psychological gravity built from manipulation, survival, and the architecture of forbidden knowledge. In that room, mother and daughter confronted the moral and existential consequences of power wielded through secrecy, realizing that the revelation of truth was no longer a question of if, but when. The revelation could no longer be contained. As Catherine's letters moved into Amelia's hands, the weight of decades of deception began to ripple outward. The children, now adults with children of their own, felt the invisible chains of obligation tight. Questions arose quietly at first. A whispered remark about resemblance, a curious glance at family portraits, an odd pattern in inheritance. The social order that had been meticulously maintained now teetered on the brink. Joseph, ever silent, remained at the center, a living testament to a conspiracy that had redefined legitimacy, inheritance, and racial hierarchy in Virginia. Families understood, instinctively, that acknowledgement of truth could destroy their standing, their alliances, even their lives. Yet avoidance was impossible. The secret had a gravity of its own. Catherine's decision ensured the legacy of her confession would endure, not as scandal, but as a dark monument to power, control, and the human capacity for both complicity and survival. Even today, in those quiet corners of Virginia history, echoes of Joseph's existence resonate, a man who defied the conventions of his time, protected by necessity, feared by circumstance, remembered only in fragments and whispers. This story is not just history. It is a blueprint for understanding the architecture of secrets, the cost of silence, and the shadowed corridors where power and forbidden knowledge converge. Those who hear it once never forget.